Every weekend, millions of people order the same drink. Gin and tonic, vodka tonic. A classic. What they don't know is they're drinking diluted medicine. That bitter taste? It comes from a compound that allowed Europe to conquer half the planet. A molecule that determined which armies survived jungle warfare. A cure so valuable that men were murdered for collecting its seeds. Modern tonic water contains 83 milligrams per liter. Colonial tonic contained 1,000. You would need to drink 12 liters of Schweppes just to get one therapeutic dose of the medicine that once saved millions of lives. The drink in your hand right now is a ghost. A memory of power so concentrated that nations went to war over the source, and almost nobody knows where it comes from. Welcome to nature's lost vault. That glowing molecule is called quinine. Its source is a tree that grows where most plants die. It lives between 5,000 and 9,000 feet in the Andes of Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, where temperatures swing wildly between day and night, and where cloud cover creates constant humidity but prevents frost. Cinchona officinalis, the fever tree. The Quechua people of the Andes used the bark for centuries, though not for malaria. They chewed it to stop shivering during bitter mountain nights. The bark's intense bitterness generated body heat. When Europeans arrived in the 1500s, they brought something the Andes had never seen: Plasmodium falciparum, the deadliest strain of malaria. By the 1630s, the disease was turning Rome into a death trap, killing popes and cardinals alike. Jesuit missionaries in Peru noticed something extraordinary. The Quechua remedy for shivering was curing European fevers. It was accidental medicine, a cold remedy that happened to kill tropical parasites. When the bark arrived in Rome in 1631, it worked. For the first time, the fevers broke. For 200 years, no one knew why it worked. They ground the bark to powder, mixed it with wine, and watched fevers break. Then, in 1820, French chemists isolated the active compound. They called it quinine. Suddenly, the tropics became conquerable. Before quinine, Africa was called the white man's grave. European mortality rates in West Africa exceeded 50% annually. Quinine changed the equation. By 1850, malaria deaths among British troops dropped by 86%. This wasn't just medicine. This was geopolitical power. The British Empire used quinine to colonize India. The Dutch used it to control Indonesia. The French used it across North Africa. And that gin and tonic you order at the bar, that isn't a cocktail invention. That is how British colonial officers in India took their mandatory daily medicine starting in 1825. 2 ounces of gin to mask the bitterness, quinine to keep them alive. By the late 1800s, quinine was the most valuable commodity on Earth. Every single gram came from South America's diminishing forests. Peru, Ecuador, and Bolivia understood what they controlled. They banned the export of seeds. Violators faced death. But European empires could not build their power on a supply chain they did not own, so they sent thieves disguised as botanists. Most failed. Seeds rotted at sea, and saplings died in transit. The British sent expeditions in the 1860s. All the seeds they smuggled contained less than 3% quinine. They were worthless. Then came Charles Ledger. Ledger was a British trader living in Bolivia. He did not know the forests, but he knew a man who did, Manuel Incra Mamani. Mamani was a local guide who could identify 29 different Cinchona varieties by sight. In 1865, he found a super tree in the mountains of Bolivia. Its bark tested at 13% quinine, 3 times the concentration of any known variety. Mamani collected 14 pounds of seeds. Ledger sold them to the Dutch government for £100. The British had refused. Mamani tried to collect more in 1871. Bolivian authorities caught him. They beat him, imprisoned him, and left him to die in his cell. His crime? Helping Europeans steal Bolivia's greatest natural resource. The Dutch took Mamani's stolen seeds to Java. They planted 17,000 hectares. By 1918, they did not just have a plantation. They had a cartel. They called it the Quina Bureau. The Bureau set global prices, controlled supply, and forced competitors out of business. British India could not compete. Ceylon failed. French Algeria failed. By 1939, 97% of the world's quinine came from one place, Java. And then came World War II. In 1942, Japan invaded Java. Within weeks, the Allies lost access to quinine. American soldiers in the Pacific began dying faster from malaria than from combat. The crisis exposed a strategic disaster. Dependence on a natural monopoly was too dangerous. The pharmaceutical industry needed a solution they could manufacture in a lab. Scientists had been trying to synthesize quinine for decades. It was too complex. But in 1934, German scientists at Bayer synthesized a related compound called chloroquine. It was cheaper than quinine. It was easier to manufacture. And initially, it worked. By 1947, chloroquine replaced nature. The pharmaceutical industry won. But here is the part they don't advertise. Chloroquine resistance began in 1957, just 12 years after it was introduced. By the 1960s, resistant strains had spread across the globe. They introduced mefloquine. Resistance appeared in 5 years. They introduced atovaquone. Resistance appeared the same year. Every synthetic antimalarial followed the same pattern: rapid success, then total failure. And that tonic water sitting behind every bar in the world, it contains the one compound that never developed widespread resistance. Today, malaria kills 610,000 people annually. 1,670 deaths every single day. 75% of them are children under 5 in sub-Saharan Africa. Children bear the worst of it. And here is what the pharmaceutical industry does not want you to know. Quinine never developed widespread resistance. Despite 400 years of continuous use, the malaria parasite still responds to quinine treatment. Studies from the 1920s and the 1930s showed that crude Cinchona bark extract was equally or more effective than purified quinine against drug-resistant strains. Remember that gin and tonic? The real version, with 1,000 milligrams of quinine, never stopped working. While synthetic drugs failed one after another, the natural compound kept killing parasites. But the global production infrastructure has collapsed. Java's plantations are gone. The Andean forests are stripped bare. The pharmaceutical market for antimalarials is worth $4 billion annually. It is dominated by artemisinin therapies. But resistance is already emerging in Rwanda and Uganda. The pattern repeats. Synthetic drug, resistance, crisis. Meanwhile, the natural compound that works sits abandoned. Here is the cruelest part. Cinchona is not difficult to grow. It is just difficult to monopolize. The tree needs specific conditions. Cool temperatures between 50 and 70 degrees, high humidity, no frost. It thrives between 5,000 and 9,000 feet elevation on mountain slopes. The Dutch discovered a secret: coppicing. If you cut the tree at the base, it regenerates with higher concentrations of medicine than the original trunk. It is a renewable source of the most effective anti-malarial on Earth. But after World War II, the knowledge of how to grow it was buried. Dutch scientific papers were archived. The seed banks were abandoned. Why? because patent protection for synthetic drugs created high margins. Cinchona is a tree. Anyone with land at the right elevation can grow it. The China Bureau proved you could build an empire on it, but only if you controlled the seeds. Once the seeds were out, the only way to maintain profit was to switch to synthetics. Every time you order a gin and tonic, you are drinking proof of this suppression. That bitter taste is a reminder, a ghost of a medicine powerful enough to colonize continents. Now diluted to 83 milligrams, just enough for flavor, not enough to cure. The same corporations profiting from anti-malarial drugs worth $4 billion annually have zero financial incentive to revive natural quinine production. Patents on synthetic drugs generate monopoly pricing. Natural compounds cannot be patented. Anyone with the right land can grow Cinchona. That is exactly why it disappeared. When chloroquine resistance emerged, the pharmaceutical industry developed new synthetics rather than returning to quinine for higher margins and better control. Each new drug buys another decade before resistance renders it useless. Each new drug generates billions during its brief window of efficacy. And quinine, the compound in your weekend cocktail that never stopped working after 400 years, remains effectively suppressed through economic abandonment. Parts of Hawaii, the Appalachian Highlands, and Northern California fall within Cinchona's temperature and elevation range. Small-scale cultivation is possible. The tree's requirements are demanding, but not impossible. What's missing isn't botanical potential. It's systematic suppression of the knowledge needed to make it economically viable on a distributed scale. The next time you order a gin and tonic, taste that bitterness. That's not just flavor. That's the memory of what pharmaceutical companies decided you didn't need to know. The industry has billions of dollars to keep these solutions quiet. We have something stronger, the truth. But truth only matters if it is shared. If you believe this knowledge deserves to be saved, join us. Subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault. Help us build the library that belongs to everyone, because you can't patent nature. And together, we can make sure they never suppress it again. This is Nature's Lost Vault.